Hey, it's Zach from The Last Drop, and I'm here with Assaf from DRKHORSE. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for coming. Yeah, so this is our little studio, the Dark Cloud Studio. DRKHORSE is a coaching brand here in Vancouver. We have a very specific approach on how we like to do things. And the first entry point that we have is this studio. So people come in, get their numbers right. Kind of a really tricked out type of test where nothing's invasive, nobody needs to be afraid, nobody's going to get their finger pricked, no blood, no mess, no nothing. You come in, put your bike in, fancy sensors on you, and then let you roll. It's a pretty cool experience. So
Thanks.
Thanks for coming in, yeah.
Thank you. And how long is today going to take?
So a test usually takes up to an hour and a half. So from the moment you come in till we get all the numbers we need, it's about an hour and a half. Ride time is about 45 minutes, give or take, depending on the person. And it is individualized. So the person will come in, and it's mostly based on their level. Sometimes it's also based on their weight, but usually it depends on their level. So we do a bit of a quick interview to see who you are, where you're at, what you're training for, and maybe sometimes with who as well. And then we basically tailor the intensity to you. So nobody needs to be afraid that they're gonna come and do a test that isn't suited for them. There's no cookie cutting here. So about 45 minutes, give or take, and that again depends on the type of protocol that we use for the individual. That's pretty much it.
And then what can we expect coming out of the hour and a half?
Yeah, so after you had your test and coffee and relax, we actually dive into the details and send the data over to a data analyst that we have on the team. And he runs through the data, analyzes everything, and then both them and I have a discussion on the data, and that's really to put everything into context. So a lot of that information is something you don't have to be bothered by. It's a lot of really detailed physiology stuff and really looking at the analytics and how they portray the individual, and then trying to construct some information that they can actually take and start writing with right away. It takes about 2 to 3 days most of the time. It doesn't take too long, but you get a full report. It's about 3 pages long with your training zones, training recommendations, strengths and limiters, and we all have them. So it's really good to know them right off the bat. And then you get also a video that explains everything that we went through in terms of our analysis on the back end in a very simplified manner, and recommendations on really specific things that we may have found on you, whether it's bilateral differences, potential weaknesses that could lead to injuries and stuff like that, any specific training recommendations for the goals that you have in mind.
Super exciting. What type of rider would you recommend to come in?
I would recommend to anybody who wants to start cycling and to, perhaps hire a coach, or perhaps, sign up to their local fondo, or even join a club. It would be very beneficial for them to come in and do a test like this. It's just, the parallel to this would be to come into a bike fit when you first buy your bike, right? So you'll spend all that time and all that money on a bike. If you go to a bike fitter, they're going to save you all of the hassle of not necessarily buying the right fit or not feeling comfortable. You'll be able to just know what bike you want to buy, what suits you. They'll fit you on the bike, and from the first ride, you feel right at home. So it's the same thing for us.
Awesome. Well, let's get to it.
Perfect.
How are you feeling?
Nervous, clearly. My heart rate's going above 80, not even moving yet. I'm very excited though. I want to see what all this data comes back as.
And how hard are you going to go out of 10?
11. Let's find the 11. We don't know anything less than that.
Wow. Way to go, man.
Nice. Good. Okay, stay there just for a little bit. Good, and I'll give you some cool down, but don't pedal, just relax. Good job. Good.
Amazing job. You went for it.
I couldn't finish.
Amazing. Nice.
The lead stopped.
Amazing.
Thank you. So how are we feeling, Zach?
I'm nervous.
Yeah? How do you think you're gonna do?
This is what I like about this test. I'm gonna do whatever I can do,
Yeah?
right? I'm gonna give it my best, and that's it.
Are you gonna give it every last drop?
Yeah, every last drop. Always.
Awesome. All right, let's see.
You lift that one.
Yeah, I'll show you guys what this one looks like. So we're trying to find the lower back muscles called the paraspinals, and go roughly around this area. Squeeze here and place your. What's that?
You have one of the same sensors on either side of the back, right? Okay.
So we're looking at bilateral differences between
Got it.
and see if there are any. And also. Here's a very, I said, this is how you can identify a sprinter from endurance athlete. Just look how low your values are here. The gap between your recovery and your desaturation is vastly greater than what it is for you.
Ooh.
Your muscles can use up a lot of oxygen. And probably the type of muscle that you have working for you, because we have different types of fiber types, is probably based also on your genetics, but also on your type of training. It's more explosive, more to be called type 2 fibers, right? So fast twitch, white fiber type, and you use a lot of oxygen compared to
Interesting.
So it's obviously a very complicated observation to make, but it's just so cool to see how low you're going, and it's not hard yet.
Yeah.
So very cool to see.
Zach, how are you feeling?
Tired.
Good job.
What's the effort right now? Out of 10?
9, 10, 8, 9, 8, 9.
8, 9?
Not quite
Oh,
there.
almost there. Come on, man. You got one more in you.
You can get us out of the way.
Can you get out of saddle? Can you get out of saddle? You can get out of saddle if you want to, man. Come on. Let's go. Keep the cadence. So close. Good job, man. You got this. Let's go. Let's finish the effort. 2 minutes.
Oh, shit.
Right there, man. Come on. A little bit.
Yeah, that's it. Nice work. Nice.
Nice, man.
Just relax. Good job. We'll give you a cool down in just a minute. Nice work. Nice work. Awesome. Wow. Yep. Nice heart rate for sure. Wow. Nice work. That was awesome. So yeah.
So good.
Hey guys,
So I wanted to make a quick video on the test that both of you guys did. This one you can also share with the group if you want. And this is where we're going to compare both Nate and Zach to look at the differences between them, what's similar and yet what is different and why it's important. So before we begin, perhaps let's go over what it is that you guys went through so that others who may be interested in doing this as well will know what they're up against. So this test is called the 5-1. Now, the reason why it's called the 5-1 is because you have 5-minute work steps with 1 minute passive rest in between. Now, the reason why it's structured this way is because we care about two main things. First, we care about the effect of intensity on muscle oxygenation during activity. So the harder you go, we want to see what that does to your muscle's ability to use the oxygen that's coming to it. The other thing that we care about is to see the effect of intensity on your ability to recover, to deliver oxygen back to the muscle. So obviously during work, the muscle is consuming oxygen. The harder it works, it will increase its consumption. And then during recovery, we will see an attempt to deliver that oxygen back to the muscle, even though the muscle is no longer working at that point. So that both those aspects, those different components, give us a complete picture of both how much oxygen the muscle is using in real time and how well your cardiopulmonary system is able to deliver oxygen back during that 1 minute recovery phase. So those two components can give us a lot of information and insight about what type of athletes we are dealing with. Is this person someone who has a more endurance or kind of a diesel type engine, meaning that they can actually maintain oxygen at a pretty high level? Maybe their muscle type is more type 1 fiber, slow twitch type fiber, where they're very efficient at using oxygen, or it's someone who's more explosive and more of a sprinter type person that uses maybe a type 2 fiber more predominantly than relative to a diesel type engine, more of a race car. And they also require a different type of fuel to keep them going, probably something that is easier to break down like carbs and less so fat. And obviously you can in many cases just look at the individual and know, but this type of test really opens up the ability to understand a little bit of what's happening underneath the surface. And the beauty is we don't need any invasive measures to do so. So in this particular case, we only rely on the sensors that we have, which are superficial. They don't penetrate the surface of the skin, and we don't require any mask or tubes or any of that complicated stuff. And the cool thing is you can see the information coming at you in real time on the screen. So that's really cool. Okay, so the protocol. So we started here at 80 watts for both of you guys. You had the same intensity, the same resistance. The reason why we have this ramp here and not a straight line like in the other steps is because we picked up Zach's power meter in the beginning of the test, which obviously was not working. We're looking at Nate's data. So Zach's bike were placed aside, and by the time we picked it up, the first stage was coming to an end. But actually in this intensity, it doesn't really matter because it's so low for Nate that he probably even wouldn't have felt it even if the power would have been a nice square wave. So we can see, let me just walk you through the different lines that we're looking at. So this is the Training Peak software. This is what every athlete that I work with usually gets to see on their end. I don't need to bother you with the back-end analysis where I actually go deep into each of the variables when I run these tests, but just as a nice visual, I think this is a nice one to look at. So starting the first step at 80 watts, the next one up is 120 watts, and this one is 170 watts. We go up by about 40 watt per step, and obviously the variations that we may see a little bit is the power shifting a little bit with the cadence and Nate's attempt to just hold the pace that we're putting him under. The RPM here is less relevant because we're not measuring it directly, so I'll remove that. But what we do care about is the heart rate response, which is coming up in red. And then the speed also, we don't really care about that because it's on a trainer. So all we care about is the power resistance and the heart rate response. And then below here, this is muscle oxygenation of his left leg, of Nate's left leg. Okay, now I want to compare both Nate and Zach's left leg, so we'll all be on the same page. Now, what we can see here is Nate is actually displaying something that we see in most of the participants that come to, most of the clients that come through the studio. This is a case where we have someone who is very endurance built, more a diesel type engine. Most people are in that category, and they tend to have a more of a arc type response profile. In this case, you can see there's this increase in oxygenation, primarily due to a warm-up effect, where all the vessels are becoming vasodilated. So basically increasing the amount of blood that's coming into the muscle. And at some point we hit a ceiling. Now the difference between what we see here and these little bumps characterize the 1 minute passive recovery step. So if I highlight one of them, you'll see at the bottom that what we see, the peak here, is correlated with the 1 minute recovery phase. Now, during the steps themselves, up to this point, we see that all of them are either flat or increasing. But after at this step, we can start to see that things are not increasing anymore, nor is the peak of the 1 minute recoveries, also known as a hyperemic response or hyperemia. So this is a good indication for where the tempo or sweet spot zone is, where supply and demand of oxygen is being matched, which means that you can sustain this pace for a significant amount of time. We're talking about hours, but at this pace, the rate of consumption is greater. You have to put greater focus on your breathing. So holding a conversation at this pace becomes a bit more cumbersome. You have to really pay closer attention to your fueling at this point to maintain the intensity that you're going at. This is very comparable to what you would use mostly for climbing, racing as well. So for Nate, this came about at around 250 watts. So up to 250 watts, give or take, Nate wasn't really working too hard or hard at all, actually. So anything below that, he was pretty much nose breathing. So a very good power to have at this point. However, beyond that, you can clearly see that everything is presenting a downward trend, which means that this is above the anaerobic threshold, above your sustainable domains. Now, what is the difference between this and FTP? Now, Nate reported that his FTP, according to the test that he did, which can be either the RAM test that you would do normally on Zwift or trainer road, in this particular case, or maybe even a 20-minute FTP test that you'll just do on the road, extrapolating it to an hour. The problem with those tests is that you don't know the metabolic disturbance that is actually happening physiologically. So you're doing this based on empirical evidence. So you're doing a 20-minute test and you're extrapolating it to an hour, assuming that the metabolic changes that are happening will allow you to maintain that intensity for up to 1 hour, but you don't really know. Here we can see that actually, in Nate's case, he reported that his threshold was about 300 and plus, I don't remember exactly the number, but maybe actually I have it somewhere. But here we see that the average power output where Nate is starting to elicit his super threshold behavior. Okay, so he reported his FTP to be at 310 watts from his tests. Here we see that it's actually hovering lower than that, somewhere around sub 300. So in this case, we would say, okay, anytime you go near 300, at least at this time of the year, right now, you should start to count your bullets, because at this point, you are starting to run out of energy at an exponential rate. So this is why it's so important to have these direct measurements to be accurate with your numbers, both for your aerobic threshold and your anaerobic threshold, to make sure that you're either working in the right domain to get all the adaptations that are coming out of this type of training, or that you're not kind of running out of energy or burning your engine off when you're trying to ride at threshold or above. Okay, now let's look at Zach's data. Zach is not your typical endurance type performer. And the reason why is because Zach is more of a sprinter type person who has a lot of muscle mass relative to his overall body or body weight. And his fiber typology is very likely more of a sprinter's type that likes carbohydrates, that is very explosive, that can generate a huge amount of power, but perhaps it's not sustainable for a very long time. So Nate is more of the diesel engine, and Zach is more of the dragster. So here we can see again the same type of protocol. Heart rate is a little bit higher, about 5 beats at the very end of the test, higher than Nate's, but his heart rate response at threshold is relatively much higher than it was for Nate. So Nate's aerobic threshold was 133 or 32 beats per minute. For Zach, it was about 144 beats per minute. So more than a 10 beat difference. Again, this is highly individualized, so it's not as if a higher heart rate or a lower heart rate is better or worse, but it's just an interesting observation. Usually people that do have this sprinting capability tend to run a bit higher. Metabolically, they're much more active than most. But the thing that's really interesting is he does not present this arc that we saw with Nate. In his case, his muscles tend to use oxygen, a lot of oxygen, right from the get-go. And when they get above their tempo zone, they're pretty much maxed out. So the question becomes, how is he able to maintain this intensity for pretty much the same amount of time? Well, one of the ways is obviously training, but the other way is that he is not going to be able to last, at least out in the field, as long as Nate can, and he will have to consume a much bigger amount of calories, even though he weighs a little bit less than Nate. But it's just because of the type of muscles that he is using versus Nate. So this is a really important aspect. The individual understanding of how your own muscle functions and even what type of muscles you're dealing with should really guide the type of training that you do, perhaps even the type of goals you want to list for yourself, and primarily the type of fueling strategies that you want to use. So it's really difficult and can be very costly and time consuming to change a dragster into a diesel type engine. And same thing in reverse. There's a limit to how much we can actually shift our physiology. But knowing which physiology we have right off the bat in a test like this can really help us guide the type of training that we want to do. So that's a huge benefit of doing something like this, where you get a glimpse into your own physiology rather than just understanding where the threshold is. Because the thing is here, not specifically from this muscle location, but we actually measured Zach's shoulder as well, which was, in his case, a much better indicator of where his arc type behavior was. I don't have it here, but if anybody's interested, I can send it to them directly. But we know from that data that the threshold for Zach, both for the aerobic threshold and the anaerobic threshold, was exactly the same as Nate, which makes a lot of sense. These guys train a lot of time together and they do very similar things. So their thresholds may be the same, but the way they get there and the amount of cost that they have to pay to get there is very different. So, Nate is more efficient quote unquote efficient in terms of using his oxygen, whereas Zach is more costly. But when they get to the finish line, 9 times out of 10, Zach will beat Nate in a sprint. So how would you use that? How would you use it even as a strategy for a race? How would you use it in your training? You know, what things can you do together and what things you shouldn't do together? You know, what types of goals can we prescribe to each of to an individual knowing this information? There's a lot that goes into this, but primarily, you know, how much time does it take for each individual to recover is another huge aspect that is very much tied to their own physiology. So all of these aspects are things that we can learn from a test like this, and that's why personally I encourage all of my athletes to undergo something similar to this, where they can get a glimpse into what's happening underneath the skin. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out directly at info@darkhorsecycling.com. You can do it through our website, and you can also follow us on Instagram. You can go to darkhorsecycling.com to have all the links there. Yeah, more than happy to answer any questions you may have through Slack. So yeah, fire away.